Chinese had a disciplined atmosphere. Even so, it was not a pleasant atmosphere. It was one full of duplicity. The whole character of the camp was that we were a lot of bad hats who'd got to be reformed. At times it took the form that we were naughty children and that Nanny was going to punish us until we fell into line and admitted our mistakes.
The Chinese had no doubt whatever in their indoctrination sessions, which took place every morning from 9:30 till midday and again from 2 till 4 in the afternoon. They had no doubt whatever that these indoctrination sessions would undermine our previous convictions and would convert us to the principles of Marxism-Leninism. And as they often said to us under the terms of their famous lenient policy, their phrase, not mine, their famous lenient policy, we could liquidate you immediately as war criminals. You've come here to wage this bloody war in Korea for world capitalism against the peace-loving peoples of the world. We have the right to liquidate you, but we know that you are just little pawns in the great capitalist game. You are tools in the hands of your capitalist masters. And therefore, we are going to give you the chance of being re-educated.
Bill Shadish once discussed the point of this re-education with one of his Chinese captors.
I said to him, you know, if you look out the window in the compound, the lowest man out there, when he goes home, will live better than you will ever dream. How do you intend with this indoctrination to make communists out of us when we know that? And he laughed. He said, Doctor, that's where you're wrong. We don't intend to make communists out of you. And I will remember the rest of my life what he said. He said, if I can make that much doubt in your mind that your country is wrong, we win.
Well, a lot of the lads, they started to believe in what they was telling them, you know. And you could understand, you know, when they told you about the directorships and all the different things that MPs and members of Parliament was in. So how could they work for the benefit of you while the members of Parliament, when they own most of the factories you work in? You know, and they started to believe it. And there was a lot of sense in what they said. As I say, at the time, I didn't take any notice of it at all. But as the years gone by and I've got older, you start to realise a lot of the things what they said was true.
Oh, yes, I tried that. But after 3 or 4 months, I gave the British troops up as a bad job. Because if that had kept them there for 30 years, they still wouldn't have grasped the fundamental contradictions between capitalism and socialism. Nor would they ever convinced us that their way of life was better than ours.
Meanwhile, in South Korea, a parallel battle was developing in the UN's camp for communist prisoners on the island of Koje-do. Behind the welcoming facade, there lay not passive imprisonment, but violent struggle. The North Korean and Chinese POWs were removed 200 miles from the front line, but for them, the war was by no means over.
Since the beginning of the Korean conflict, UN forces have captured more than 180,000 prisoners of war, both North Korean and Chinese. Oriental prisoners carry lice and vermin for long periods before their capture. A week of segregation and daily eradicates these disease-carrying pests. Each day brings new prisoners to Koje-do, prisoners who were taught by their leaders to expect torture and death. Instead, they receive a new insight into UN policy, humane treatment by our military police force, and strict conformity with the articles of the Geneva Convention.
This impression of docile prisoners enjoying the warm care of the UN was misleading.
The basic mistake that we made in handling these prisoners, in my opinion, was this. We deloused them, cleaned them up when they arrived there, and gave them copies of the Korean Convention and expected them to be good boys. Well, they didn't play by the Geneva rules. They had no rules except their own. And we were terribly, terribly naive. If we had killed a few at first, we wouldn't have had to kill so many later on.
Although we were imprisoned physically, spiritually we never submitted to the Americans. We were still soldiers of the Korean People's Army, and we would go on fighting until our death if necessary. We knew the question of the prisoners of war was being discussed at the truce talks, so it was important that we struggled to help our fatherland. We fought with desperate resolution.
The communist prisoners were to rise up out of control. British troops would be called in to help clean up the mess.
Oh, they were good prisoners of war. They were an example, I think, as far as military history goes, to how prisoners of war should behave to create the maximum nuisance value and to bring combat troops from the front line to the prisoner of war compounds to control them.
There were many problems on Koje-do. South Korean guards sometimes mistreated their communist captives. American troops were frequently unconcerned.
They regarded them as Oriental cattle and referred to them as slit-eyed yellow bastards, and really didn't treat them as one expected to be treated under the Geneva Convention.
The prisoners were politically divided. Many Chinese had recently fought against the communists in the Civil War. Some now saw their capture as an escape route to nationalist Taiwan.
When we came into the prison camp, we were left entirely to our own devices. We divided ourselves into various groups. Some of us wanted to go back to the mainland. Some of us wanted to go to Taiwan. So we had what you might call political conflict. You want to go back to the mainland? Well, we'll kill you.
The camp was divided into many compounds. Where Chinese nationalists held sway, they tattooed anti-communist slogans on fellow prisoners, making it painfully difficult for anyone later to change allegiance. Where the North Korean communists were in control, they dominated with an iron hand. The hardline compounds were no-go areas for the UN guards. Prisoners who wavered from the party line were brutally disciplined.
Prior to entry and the splitting up of the compounds into smaller units, if anybody tried to escape from the compound, they were pulled back and either put to death by a water hose being put in their mouth and leaving them to drown, or they were hauled up to the ridge poles of the tents and tied up by their testicles, or they were speared.
The immediate cause of this violence was a process called screening. Its stated purpose was to find out which prisoners wished to return to the communist side after the war. The UN said screening gave individuals a free choice. The communists said it promoted defections through intimidation.
I think that it was impossible to have a free and fair screening under the circumstances that prevailed inside the prisoner of war compounds. For the very simple reason that a man was putting his life on the line when he committed himself. He was subject to being, he was a target by one side or the other.
As a newsman, Caius Beach shuttled between the two main scenes of action, Kojedo and Panmunjom. Inside the tents, the peace talks bogged down on the prisoner repatriation issue. In April 1952, the UN side announced that following screening, only half the prisoners in their hands wished to return home. The communists considered the figures insulting propaganda. The impact on the talks was disastrous. As a North Korean delegate, Kim Ha-kim recalls.
그러나 미 제국주의자들은 서해 자유송환이라는
We never thought that the talks over this matter would block the negotiations.